What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance Crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today I'm going to be doing a continuation to my Irish potato famine video. This video's subtitle is called The Black 47. Now, if my memory serves me right, 47 represents the number of areas in Ireland, I think. I forgot the name of the districts slash provinces slash what the term is, but I think that's what 47 means. I could be completely wrong. Go in the comment section, let me know, because I know I've seen 47 quite a bit, and I did do a reaction to Geography Now's Ireland video, but it's been such a while, such a long time that I kind of forgot, so I don't really know off the top of my head. And before I start this video, I do want to make a quick announcement about another video that was meant to come out today, but it probably isn't going to be able to, and that is the Star Wars, the Clone Wars video. For those of you that don't know, I'm doing a reaction to the TV series Star Wars, the Clone Wars, and right now my next episode is Season 1, Episode 22, but I don't know why, but every once in a while when I go to the Disney Plus, the page just doesn't load. And sometimes that requires me to restart my computer in order to get the page to pop up. But because I'm in the middle of recording and everything else, I don't want to restart my computer. So I'll just have to wait until tomorrow. After I get done recording this and processing it and editing it and releasing it, after that, then I'll restart my computer and then I'll try to do a reaction later. It'll come out on Wednesday, but I don't know, it just gives me issues every once in a while. So that's the reason why that's going to be late. I'm going to try to still have the next episode after that out on Friday. That is unless, of course, the season ends, in which case I'm going to jump to The Mandalorian, Season 1, and then I'll come back to Star Wars, The Clone Wars for Season 2. But with that being said, let's jump into this video and see what it has to offer. Continue this knowledge on the Irish potato famine.
July 1846. Ireland's early summer harvest is starting to come in. Reports of blight circulate, but in the east, summer has been temperate. The hunger might be over. Lightning rends the sky. Water drops like a guillotine. An unhealthy fog blankets the land, and upon seeing it, one fisherman tells a newspaper that it's the wrath of the fairies. I knew it by the signs they were coming. And perhaps he's not far off, because a tiny, malicious organism is riding the rain. The water washes fungus spores off the infected leaves, carrying it to the ground. And under the soil, the 1846 potato crop begins to decay.
So, the blight was able to get transferred through rain? Damn, that makes it so much worse. Like, I was just thinking, like, okay, well, if you keep potatoes away from other potatoes, it should be able to, like, if you can find a way to find the ones that are infected and quarantine those, then maybe you can contain it. But no, if they can get into the soil and get into the water supply and get in the air and rain down and everything else, then we're freaking done, man. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. But I did ask in the last video, like, what the solution was, like, what did we do to eventually fix it? And I haven't seen all the comments, but I don't know if anybody answered it. So if you know exactly like what the end, well, never mind. I'm sure they'll explain the ending. If I get to the end of this series and they don't explain what they did to combat the blight, then you can explain it to me. But I'll wait. I don't want to be spoiled.
In January 1846, Daniel O'Connell had stood in Parliament and warned that Peel was not doing enough to fight the famine.
His name is
There are 5 million people on the verge of starvation, he warned. And I'm speaking from the depth of my conviction when I say, I believe the result of neglect will be death to an enormous amount. Now, 8 months later, Peel was gone, and the government was doing even less. Hunger began pulling Ireland apart. Mothers starved until their milk gave out and their babies died. Men who had survived off food depots and public work projects found succor in neither. Orders had been given to food depots to preserve their grain until December. It didn't matter. People arrived at the depots on foot, shoeless, having not eaten in days. Depots relented and passed out cornmeal, but their reserves were getting low. Gangs of men carrying shovels, marched into market towns demanding work. Food availability was not the problem. Amid the famine, bread sat in shop windows, and Irish merchants exported tons of beef, grain, and oats to England. The government refused to intervene, so, across the island, starving peasants did instead. In
That seems like a problem with, well, capitalism. Like, when it's that damn bad, then maybe you should throw people a bone and, make sure everybody's at least fed. The fact that you would still like, oh, but you didn't pay, you don't have enough money, so therefore you'll have to starve in the street. That's pretty fucked up.
Waterford, an armed militia blocked 2 barges that were transporting Irish grain for export. That done, they moved into the town, beating merchants, stealing bread, and lighting buildings
them dead in the mouth.
A unit of dragoons ordered them to disperse. When they didn't, the soldiers opened fire. 6 bodies lay in the street. Yet as Ireland reeled towards famine, in London, Sir Charles Trevelyan was retooling his relief plan to be less generous. Trevelyan was a legend in the civil service, incorruptible, pious, and hardworking. But he was also a workaholic micromanager, steeped in the Victorian belief that poverty was the sign of moral failure. To Trevelyan, the Irish problem, the fact that Ireland remained trapped in a cycle of poverty, violence, and rebellion, lay in the Irish character. They were lazy, rebellious, and took no initiative, he thought.
That's something you see a lot in America, too. Especially, like, being a black person, you see people make this dumbass argument all the time. Like, the reason why a lot of black people in America are in poverty and low-income areas is because they don't work hard and shit like that. And it's like, you're kind of ignoring the systems in place that kind of keeps people down there. Now, is there an opportunity to get out of there? Possibly. Just like I'm sure in this situation, there was probably an opportunity for some Irish people to get out there, but if they did, they were the exception. They weren't the expectation or the rule. Like, there's a system in place that's kind of keeping them down. You shouldn't be judging someone based on, like, their situation, especially when you're not taking the full situation and the context of it into account. It's almost like you're making that argument because you're trying to push a certain narrative. I mean, that's what it seems like to me whenever people ignore context and just look at one side of an argument.
Potato cultivation was too easy, only requiring a few months' labor a year, breeding idleness. And it was prone to failure. And when it failed, the Irish turned to government to feed them. Absent or neglectful Irish landowners shouldered little of the cost. And London feared that the Irish were becoming habitually dependent on government aid. To save Ireland, he thought, it needed modernization and agricultural reform. He dreamed of an anglicized Ireland, like the one that existed in its cities and market towns. One with English-style capitalism and a market economy, like theirs, to serve as a trade partner. He wanted to sweep out Ireland's communal village life and barter system, replacing it with a workforce that worked for wages rather than potatoes. One where they earned money to buy food. Trevelyan saw this blight not as a disaster, but a God-sent opportunity to remake Irish society. And he was determined to make the most of it, no matter how much suffering he had to inflict. Great guy. In fact, Trevelyan had studied under the economist Thomas Malthus, who argued that when a population outstripped food production, starvation and death was a natural and proper correction. When Malthus put forth the theory, he was thinking of Ireland, and Trevelyan agreed. That belief in Malthusian principles, alongside a commitment to non-intervention in the free market, would plunge Ireland deep into famine. So when Trevelyan rolled out his reformed relief plan, it was no surprise that its primary mission was not to feed the starving, but instead to protect the free market, prevent abuse, and teach economic lessons. When food depots reopened, the poor found that the cornmeal was no longer sold at cost. That, argued Trevelyan, undercut local merchants. Now it was market price. All food depots would close, except those in the West. And Trevelyan insisted that any maize purchased come from British merchants, not American ones. When the public works began again, job seekers discovered their new wages were based on performance rather than a flat daily fee, and even the highest wages couldn't feed a family.
And if there was a revolution at this point, you can't be mad because you've pretty much made all the ingredients necessary for a revolution to happen. Now, this is just what happens. History has shown us over and over again that when you try to fuck over the people at the expense of the elites or someone that has all the money and power and things like that, when you try to cater towards them, which is usually a smaller percentage of the population than the average person, then things happen.
The wages themselves were supposedly funded via attacks on Irish landlords, but many landlords had little to spare. And due to multiple levels of bureaucracy meant to prevent fraud, the road crew's wages often took weeks to arrive. And finally, there would be no intervention in food prices. Laissez-faire economics would rule. High prices, Trevelyan argued, would attract food imports. But, you guessed it, they didn't. In fact, food prices had soared higher than ever. It had been a bad year for agriculture, and not just in Ireland. Crops failed across Europe. Countries scrambled to import extra food, and Trevelyan was late to refill his cornmeal. So by the time he grudgingly started looking, there was little to be had. And in Ireland, potato and cornmeal prices doubled. At government food depots, hungry people arrived from miles away, only to find the maize unaffordable. Across the island, small farmers and landless agricultural workers were plunged into immediate destitution. They surged into market towns to beg for food at depots, and they even began entering the hated workhouses, a government poor relief program best described as a prison for the poor, where they lived while performing mindless work in exchange for 2 meals a day. And workhouses were abusive and inhumane by design, so the poor would only enter as a last resort. Yet even they were over capacity. Despite the people's desperation, landlords upped the eviction rate, calling in police and soldiers to throw families out and demolish their homes with the sledgehammer.
Yeah, this is going to be
crowbar.
bad.
Tenants killed livestock in retribution, and on occasion, ambushed and murdered landlords. Evicted families wandered the roads, pitching tents in ditches. Crime rates doubled. This was the season of the gunman. And it wasn't just the small tenant farmers and landless laborers showing up at the food depots. Managers reported small landowners, 10 to 15 acre men, approaching them to request aid, fine clothes hanging off their skeletal frames. One had even walked 12 miles to an unfamiliar town rather than reveal to his neighbors that he'd gone bankrupt. Blight compounded everything. In small farms, barley rotted in the field. Usually farmers paid laborers to harvest, but they had neither money nor potatoes to offer. And as if that wasn't enough, that winter, a series of blizzards ravaged the island, snow stacking to the rooftops, entombing whole villages. Soon, the new year dawned on what would be known as Black 47. January brought a strange frenzy. Families, hollow-eyed and losing hair, stumbled to the shore to eat seaweed and oysters. They scaled 300-foot cliffs just to steal bird eggs. They could have survived off fish, but they had neither the equipment, boats, nor skill for deep water fishing. And by that time, most of the fishermen had pawned their nets for cornmeal. Armed gangs ambushed government food convoys and butchered stolen cattle to survive. By the end of January, 700,000 had turned to working on public works. These famine roads were often a waste. They started nowhere and went nowhere. Malnourished work gangs broke rocks in freezing temperatures, their shoes and coats long ago lost to the pawn shop. And they died there, in great numbers, collapsing beside the roads from exhaustion. Violence against public works managers became so pervasive that many deserted their posts, while others, laden with guilt, ended their own lives. In a famine, it's not the starvation that kills you, it's the diseases that follow. Typhus, dysentery, fever, and the famine dropsy. Peasants fleeing the countryside carried them into cities, and infection ran so rampant in workhouses, the staff began to quit. Visitors and officials reported seeing villages where the want was so extreme that families lacked the energy to even bury their dead. The Irish funeral, so embodied in the culture, disappeared piece by piece. No one wanted to gather for fear of the fevers. None could afford a coffin, and eventually, even individual graves were dispensed with. Dogs scavenged the burial fields. Amid that landscape of horror, one place stood out as particularly destitute: Skibbereen, in County Cork, became internationally famous for its deplorable conditions. Drought exacerbated the famine, and after a few months, the frantic scramble to survive had passed, leaving only a lethargic wait for the grave.
I would imagine the only reason why because I doubt that there's going to be a revolution after this. The only thing I could say is maybe the reason the revolution didn't happen was because the population was so, like, beaten down by the hunger and stuff that they just didn't have the energy to do it. Because these are the ingredients for a revolution. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, well, the next series that this channel is going to do, like, if they're doing it in like time order, is going to be some type of revolution. Like, something crazy is going to happen after this. Like, it has to happen. But I look back and I'm thinking, like, okay, I don't think anything ended up happening, at least not during that particular time. So what happened to solve all this? But again, I'm sure he'll talk about it in the later video, so I don't really want any spoilers right now.
Families crawled across their cabins, too weak to even walk, and a visiting American found himself in a surreal conversation with two young women as they casually calculated how many days they had left to live. 14, they agreed. Accounts from Skibbereen made the village internationally famous, the face of the Great Hunger, and its ghoulish tales, repeated in newspapers, inspired people around the globe to raise money for famine relief. Donations came from as far away as Australia, and in the United States, even enslaved people and Native Americans raised funds for Ireland.
Really?
The international outcry finally pushed Trevelyan to act. For months, he downplayed the increasingly urgent and alarming reports from his own officers on the ground, even when they'd rebelled against his policies, selling cornmeal at cost or serving free meals at workhouses. He relented. The British government would support outdoor relief, the opening of soup kitchens and free meal distribution. But it was too little, too late. Deep famine had already affected the planting season, and the next crop would be poor. Many Irish decided they only had two options: either fight for Ireland or leave it.
Okay. Well, I know during this time, a lot of Irish people decided to come over to America, so I'm guessing a lot of them decided to leave. But like, I still don't know the full history of Ireland and who exactly were they fighting? Was it Britain or was it just England? So I don't know the history between the two, but like, I know there's been a lot of fighting since, but I don't know the story about the potato famine and what happened like immediately around that. So I don't know if like they fought during that time. I know I'm sounding ignorant, but I acknowledge that I'm ignorant. I have no idea like what the story is, so that's the reason why I'm watching this, is because I want to get at least a good idea of what might have happened. And again, just because you see something said in this video doesn't mean that it is 100% how it was. Chances are there's some details and some context that could be missing, and I will likely go and read up about it somewhere else to try to understand what might have happened. But yeah, I'm really curious about what else happened. It's really interesting they seeing that like Native Americans and slaves in America actually helped raise money to help the Irish out, because that lets you know just how bad that situation was. When you have slaves fighting to get to raise money for you, then you're in a dire situation. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I will be continuing this in a couple of days. The next one is going to come out, so I hope you guys look forward to that. If you have any information about what we've seen so far up until this point, please leave it in the comment section down below. If you do leave something about something that happens in the future, try not to make it, and I know the spoiler is probably the wrong term because this is an event that happened, a tragic event, and saying spoiler makes it sound like I'm watching a movie or something like that. But by spoiler, I mean, I don't want you to say anything that would make watching the other videos unnecessary. Like, I still want to learn something when I watch those other videos. I don't want to watch the entire thing going, oh, I know what that is. I know what happens then. I know what happens next. Like, I would still like to get some type of new information from it. But if you want to leave some information, then sure. Now, with that being said, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm Devon DaVinci. Hopefully, you've been a little more enlightened. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, but until then, I'm going to give you the deuces, and I'm signing out. Deuces.